Yeah, Gurmar got last Concordags, beg me right on Maquidamale, Chocta Burke. Minister, look, I'd like to also initially raise the issue of PCR testing. Undoubtedly, there's a massive surge in demand at the moment, and there are difficulties in catering for that demand. I'd specifically like to ask you about the possibility of opening an additional PCR test centre in Cork Airport. Local media was reporting recently that I think Rockdock there are operating at the moment, and there was reports that the HSE were going to avail of that facility in the interim. If you could clarify that, whether in your closing statement or afterwards, I'd appreciate it. And undoubtedly, just, there is that demand, as I said, and in my own hometown of Glanmire, we have a PCR test centre in St. Stephen's Hospital. And I suppose at the moment, many people that avail of the PCR test there are under the impression that that's a drive-through centre, and it's not. And I suppose if there's a possibility that the HSE could advertise that better, or if in an ideal world that PCR test centre could be converted into a drive-through centre, I think that needs to be considered, because there's ample space there on site to ensure that can be done. And can I just comment also on what Deputy Crowe mentioned earlier in regards to mask wearing? I was listening to it in my office, and I think he hit the nail on the head, because I have noticed it, and I know other deputies tried to contradict what he said earlier, but definitely I have noticed it in various settings, that mask wearing is slipping, and I think that we need a proper concerted effort to double down on that and make sure that people continue to do the basics right, and we can all do the basics. Certain people have made sacrifices and continue to make sacrifices, but as Deputy Crowe alluded to earlier, I think the very least anybody can do is wash their hands and wear a mask. I've made this case to you previously, Minister, in relation to patients that for one reason or another can't avail of a vaccine, or that have received the first dose, and because of a reaction that they might have had, they are receiving medical advice to not chance taking a second dose. And I would particularly make the case for patients who suffer from myocarditis, and if any exception could be made for them in terms of COVID certification, because a lot of those patients would have been under the impression that initially that the COVID certification was going to end back in October, November, and obviously that didn't happen. And going into the future, I'm not sure if they can indefinitely be I suppose excluded from certain aspects of a normal functioning society. So again, I would ask you to talk to the CMO and the HSE in that regard. Could I also raise the COVID Tracker app? And the COVID Tracker app is actually a fantastic tool, if utilised correctly. And I know in the early stages, when I downloaded that app, you could see how many people would have registered and logged in from day to day to say that they had no symptoms or whatever the case may be. And thinking back over the months, there was 300,000 and 400,000 people logging in daily to use it. I checked before I came in here to you, and it's at 78,000. So clearly the use of that app isn't being maximised, and I think it's something that should be constantly reviewed. Many people on the opposition benches will go on about mixed messaging and lack of communication. The COVID Tracker app is a perfect way that all people in society can access basic information, whether it's to advise people of PCR testing availability in their locality, whether it's to remind people of, I suppose, how to avail and access antigen testing correctly, whether it's to advise people of a spike in their area or in their local area. I do believe that it's underutilised, and that's reflected in the number of people that log in or don't log in every day, because it's clear, as I said from earlier, there was definitely, in the beginning, there was hundreds of thousands logging in, and as I said, only 78,000 today, so it's clearly being underutilised. Just one final point in relation to antigen testing, and look, it's something that I've spoken about for the best part of a year and a half. I am disappointed to see its slow rollout. There's no point in me denying that. But what I would say is, it is a tool. It's not there to supplement PCR. We all know that. We're not stupid. But at the same time, we need to advise people how to use it correctly. And if people are symptomatic, whether it requires an information campaign, whether it requires information going on an app or adverts on the TV or radio, we need to advise people that it's there, it should be utilised, and in my own opinion, it should be utilised free of charge, I think, to get it to people and to get people using it. A deputy earlier referenced that, you know, in large meat factories, on the construction site of the National Children's Hospital, all these companies have been using antigen testing 3, 4, 5 times a week with their employees, and if it can work in those settings, then I don't see why the larger population can't use it as well. And if we inform them how to utilise it best, and the more you test, the more effective and more accurate it will be, I think it's better for us all in the ongoing fight with COVID.